Hi class! Welcome to the second part of our developmental psychopathology lecture. And we left off asking whether or not the most prevalent childhood disorder is autism. And I thought this would be a great way for us to introduce different terms of prevalence and incidence. So when we think about how common disorders are, we can define them either by prevalence, which is how many people within a population have the disorder. And we can also think about incidence. Incidence is the new cases of a disorder. So how many cases do we have now? So just to kind of get a sense of how prevalent do you think these disorders are, where would you rank them? Autism, depression, ADHD, and anxiety for children. So you've already seen the preview of the true-false quiz that autism is not the most prevalent disorder. Of the disorders that are listed here, autism, depression, ADHD, or anxiety, what we see is that we have depression. When I put the pointer over here, you can't see that this is depression, but this is the rates of depression, anxiety, or other behavioral disorders. So ADHD and things like conduct disorder would be under those behavioral disorders. But one of the things I want you to notice here is how the prevalence changes by ages. So we even have depression in 3 to 5-year-olds. That's this smallest little guy over here, but it increases as we get older. So 12 to 17-year-olds are more likely to have depression. Same thing happens with anxiety. We see it is a bit more prevalent than even depression is. And behavioral disorders, they kind of have their peak in that middle school age, and then it slightly decreases by the time that adolescents are in high school. And if we do just a rank order of across all children, what is the prevalence? The most prevalent disorder in the United States is ADHD. So this is, if we can look at past 12 months prevalence. So what's the rate of this disorder if a child has been has had symptoms within the last 12 months, or if any time of their life they've been diagnosed. And what you can see here is ADHD is around 9% for lifetime. Anxiety disorders are somewhere around 5%, depression about 4%. And I just want you to notice here that autism is around 2%. So while we talk a lot about autism, it's only 2 in 100 children will have autism. Those are pretty staggering rates, but at the same time, it's not as prevalent as these other disorders. And I think it's really interesting to think about that. Even schizophrenia is way down here at 0.1%. So this unfortunately is a disorder that we're not going to talk about. So we're actually probably not going to talk about basically the last 3 disorders in this class, just because they are a lot less prevalent. So we are more likely to, if you're going out into the real world, if you're a teacher, if you're a, going to be a clinician or a child psychopathologist later on in your life, the more common ones that you will run across are things like ADHD, anxiety, depression, and conduct problems and autism. So you may be asking yourself, well, how has this changed over time? And what we have noticed is that there has been a lot of increasing rates of mental health concerns. We see some diagnoses increasing a lot, such as things like autism. Part of that might be that, the prevalence, it's probably not that the prevalence is increased, but things like we just have more awareness about it. And so that might increase the amount that children are actually being diagnosed. We also see that there are more prescriptions of psychotropic medications, so things like stimulant medications for ADHD, or things like anti-anxiety and depression medications for children with anxiety and depression. But again, that also goes along with that increase in prevalence. So we see more of it, and then we see more medications being used. And we'll be focusing on hospital admissions. We have some really great videos to show you about how we have this increase in hospital admissions, but at the same time don't have enough beds to get treatment for long-term treatment. Another term that you should be familiar with is this term called comorbidity. Basically, comorbidity just means that there are multiple disorders that a child can have at the same time. And what we see is that actually for children, most of them do have comorbidity. So approximately 40% of children will have 2 or more disorders. So they might be diagnosed with ADHD and autism, anxiety and depression, for example. So most children will show that comorbidity. And if we really think about this, there's wide-ranging consequences to having childhood disorders, development in general. So things like autism might hinder development of social skills, for example, later on in life. ADHD and conduct problems can disrupt performance in school. Their relationships with family and friends can also be affected, and overall happiness and well-being.